That structure has to go, and you will pay a $10,000 fine for erecting it without approval, Mr. Miller. The voice, a grating mix of saccharine condescension and iron-fisted certainty, sliced through the quiet morning air. I stood on my own porch, a cup of rapidly cooling coffee in my hand, and stared at the woman planted on my lawn as if she owned it. This was Karen, president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. She was a caricature of suburban tyranny, a woman whose plus-size frame was perpetually squeezed into brightly colored pantsuits, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were two of her board cronies, a pinch-faced woman named Carol and a beefy, silent man I only knew as Bob, both clutching clipboards like they were holy relics. They stood just beyond the ancient gnarled oak that marked my unofficial property line, a tree older than the state itself, its roots blissfully ignorant of the meticulously manicured HOA-approved lawns just a few feet away. The structure in question was my new smokehouse, a beautiful creation of fieldstone and cedar I'd spent the last 3 months building with my own hands. It wasn't some cheap metal shed. It was a monument, a tribute to my grandfather who taught me the slow art of turning tough cuts of meat into things of beauty. It sat a good 100 yards from the road, nestled near the woods at the back of my acre, a rustic masterpiece that blended perfectly with the land. Karen's eyes, however, didn't see a tribute. They saw a violation, an unapproved, non-compliant rogue edifice that dared to exist without her signature on a triplicate form. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice dangerously calm, a skill honed over 20 years in the Army. "I think you're mistaken. You're on my property, and that smoke house is on my property. It has nothing to do with you or the HOA." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a startled bird. "Oh, Mr. Miller, your property is within the Oakwood Preserve community. That makes it our business. Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants clearly states any outbuilding over 100 square feet requires pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. "You never submitted a plan, you never paid the application fee. Therefore, you are in violation. The fine is $10,000 plus $500 per day until the unapproved structure is removed." My jaw tightened. $10,000. It was an absurd, punitive number designed to shock and awe, to force immediate capitulation. I looked past her at the neat rows of identical houses with their identical mailboxes and their HOA-mandated seasonal lawn decorations. I had lived on this patch of dirt my entire life, long before Oakwood Preserve was even a glossy brochure in a developer's office. My great-grandfather had staked this claim. I had inherited not just the land, but the fierce, unwavering belief that it was mine. "Karen," I said, letting the name hang in the air, stripped of any polite prefix. "My property is not, nor has it ever been, part of your association. You have no authority here." Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury. This was the part she enjoyed, the moment the velvet glove came off. "We'll see what the county court says about that when we place a lien on your home for failure to pay. Your defiance is only going to make this more expensive for you. Remove it, or we will." She turned with a dramatic flourish, her cronies falling into formation behind her, and marched back toward the pristine sidewalk of her suburban kingdom, leaving the threat hanging in the air like the scent of poison. I stood there, the coffee in my hand now stone cold, the quiet satisfaction of my morning shattered. They had finally done it. After years of passive-aggressive notes about the length of my grass or the non-standard color of my trim, they had escalated to open warfare. She thought she was dealing with just another homeowner she could bully into submission. She thought she held all the cards. What she didn't know was that I was holding an ace, a piece of paper over a century old, signed by the hand of a president, that trumped every single one of her petty bylaws. She had just tried to ban my smokehouse on land my family had held since 1903. She had no idea the kind of fight she had just picked. If you think that's insane, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you were watching from. I want to hear your own HOA nightmare stories, because I promise you, what happened next is a masterclass in how to dismantle a petty tyrant, piece by bureaucratic piece. The battle lines were drawn on my front lawn, but the war would be won in the county records office, and it would be a victory smoked slow and low, just like my grandfather's brisket. The screen door slammed behind me with a satisfying crack, a sound that echoed the fracture in my composure. Sarah, my wife, was at the kitchen island, a worried line creasing her brow. She'd seen the whole pathetic motorcade pull up from the window. "What did Queen Karen want this time?" she asked, her voice tight with the same frustration I felt. She'd been my rock through 3 deployments. She wasn't intimidated by a suburban despot, but the constant, low-grade harassment was wearing on her. I set my mug down on the granite countertop with a thud. "She wants the smokehouse gone, and $10,000. Sarah's eyes widened. "She can't be serious." "As a heart attack," I grunted, pacing the length of our kitchen. "Threatened a lien, daily fines, the whole 9 yards." This wasn't just about a building. It was about principle. It was about legacy. This acre of land was an island, a holdout from a bygone era. My great-grandfather, Elias Miller, had come here with nothing but a government mule and a dream. He worked this land, cleared it, built a small cabin where our house now stood, and in 1903, after years of toil, he received the land patent. It wasn't just a deed, it was a direct grant from the United States government, a reward for fulfilling the promise of the Homestead Act. The land was his, free and clear, unencumbered. For decades, this area was nothing but farms and woodland. My grandfather was born in that cabin. My father was born in the small house that replaced it. I was born there too. I grew up exploring every inch of these woods, fishing in the creek that marked the southern border, learning the history of the land not from a book, but from the stories passed down through generations. Then, in the late 1990s, the city began to swell. A developer, Sterling Homes, bought up the hundreds of acres of farmland surrounding our property. They saw cookie-cutter houses and profit margins. We saw the end of an era. My father, a man as stubborn as the oak tree in the front yard, refused every offer they made, some of them astronomical. "You can't buy a man's soul, son," he told me, "and this land is part of ours." So they built around us. The plat map for the new Oakwood Preserve development fund showed a neat 1-acre cutout in the middle of Phase 2, a square hole in their grand design labeled simply non-included parcel. When my father passed and I inherited the property, the title search was a formality, but a clear one. My acre was legally distinct, a sovereign island in a sea of beige stucco and HOA covenants. We were geographically in Oakwood Preserve, but we were not legally of it. The HOA had never seemed to grasp this distinction. They saw a house within their boundaries and assumed jurisdiction. For years, the letters had come, courtesy notices about my unapproved vegetable garden, the non-standard fence I'd built to keep the deer out, my work truck being parked in my own driveway for more than 24 hours. I'd ignored them all, filing them in a shoebox labeled Karen's complaints. But this was different. A $10,000 fine, and the threat of a lien was a declaration of war. "Right," I said, stopping my pacing, "and time to go to the armory." Sarah knew exactly what I meant. In the back of my office closet was an old, heavy footlocker from my great-grandfather's time. It was made of dark, fragrant cedar and bound with iron straps. It wasn't a safe, but it was a vault of our family's history. Inside, beneath my grandfather's service medals and my father's high school yearbooks, was a leather portfolio. I laid the footlocker on the floor and lifted the heavy lid. The smell of old paper and time itself filled the room. I carefully lifted out the portfolio and carried it to the big oak desk in my office. My hands were steady as I undid the leather tie. There they were, the original deeds, the hand-drawn survey maps showing the creek and the big oak as boundary markers, and on the very bottom, protected by a sheet of vellum, was the crown jewel. The original land patent, number 78,432, issued by the General Land Office of the United States, signed in ink by a clerk on behalf of President Theodore Roosevelt in 1903. The paper was thick, almost like cloth, the script elegant and precise. It granted unto Elias Miller and his heirs and assigns, forever, this specific tract of land. It was a foundational document, a direct chain of title from the government to my family, an HOA covenant written in 2001 by a developer's lawyer, was a flimsy piece of toilet paper by comparison. I stared at the document, feeling the weight of a century of ownership. Karen's mistake wasn't just that she had underestimated me, it was that she had no comprehension of what she was up against. She was fighting against a set of rules she'd invented last year. I was fighting with the full weight of American history and property law on my side. I took out my phone and took a high-resolution photograph of the patent. Then I did the same for the original survey map. My mind, trained to think in terms of strategy and counteroffensives, was already formulating a plan. This would not be a shouting match over a fence. This would be a campaign fought with paper, with precision, and with the righteous certainty of the law. Karen had fired the first shot, but I was about to answer with overwhelming force. I was going to bury her in a mountain of her own beloved bureaucracy. The official notice arrived 3 days later, delivered by a nervous-looking mailman who practically shoved the certified letter into my hand and scurried away, as if the envelope itself were radioactive. It was. It was a formal declaration of hostilities, printed on heavy cream-colored letterhead embossed with the Oakwood Preserve HOA logo, an oak leaf strangling a house. The letter was a masterpiece of pseudo-legal intimidation, a dense thicket of clauses, subsections, and references to bylaws I'd never seen, let alone agreed to. The fine was officially stated as $10,000, with an additional penalty of $500 per day for continued non-compliance. It helpfully included a running tally, informing me I already owed $11,500. There was a deadline, of course. I had 14 days to either pay the fine and submit a remediation plan, that is, a plan to demolish my own property, or the matter would be turned over to their legal counsel for immediate lien proceedings. It was designed to induce panic, to make a homeowner feel small, isolated, and powerless against the crushing weight of the association. It had the opposite effect on me. It focused me. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. Cold, righteous fury, however, is a precision instrument. I didn't get mad, I got to work. My first call was to Dave Jensen. Dave and I had gone through basic training together, two scared kids from different sides of the country. We'd served 2 tours together, and he'd been the one to drag me to safety after an IED flipped our Humvee. He'd gotten out, gone to law school on the GI Bill, and now ran a successful practice specializing in the one thing he hated more than insurgents: bullies. He was a property law expert, and he had a particular loathing for overreaching HOAs. I texted him a picture of the letter. His reply came 2 minutes later, a single profane word, followed by, "Call me now." I laid out the situation for him, from the smokehouse to the confrontation with Karen to the history of the land. I could hear him practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. "Jack, my man, this is the case I've been dreaming of," he said, his voice dropping into what I called his hunter mode. "This isn't just a winnable case. This is a salt the earth and burn their village kind of case, Lynn." He gave me my marching orders. First, do not talk to them. Not a word, not on the phone, not in person. All communication from this point forward is in writing. Second, you are going to draft a response, and it's going to be a thing of beauty. This is your first volley. It needs to be professional, precise, and utterly terrifying in its legal certainty. Third, create the paper trail. Document everything. For the next 2 hours, Dave walked me through the process. He wasn't just giving me legal advice. He was giving me a combat strategy. We weren't just going to defend, we were going to counterattack. The response letter was my primary weapon. I spent the rest of the day drafting it. It wasn't an angry screed, it was a cold, clinical dissection of their false claims. I started by citing their letter, referencing its date and their file number, demonstrating my meticulousness. Then I began my rebuttal. To the board of directors of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, it began. This letter is in response to your correspondence dated date regarding alleged violations on the property located at 150 Old Farm Road. Please be advised that your assertions are factually and legally incorrect. I then laid out the history, not in narrative form, but as a series of undisputed facts. Fact: the property at 150 Old Farm Road County Parcel 1D, number 123-45-678, is not and has never been subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, of the Oakwood Preserve HOA. I followed this with the knockout blow. Fact: title to said property is held under the authority of United States Land Patent number 78,432, issued on March 2, 1903, under the Homestead Act of 1862. As established by federal law and affirmed by numerous court precedents, see, I included a couple of obscure but relevant case citations Dave had given me, a land patent represents the first and highest evidence of title, and any subsequent encumbrance, such as an HOA covenant to which the patent holder or their successors have not explicitly agreed, is null and void with respect to the patented land. I included a high-quality scan of the patent and the original survey map, each page initialed and dated by me. I formally stated that the HOA had no jurisdiction, their bylaws were inapplicable, and their fines were illegitimate. I didn't stop there. I went on the offensive. Furthermore, your threats to place a lien on my property are noted. Please be advised that the filing of a fraudulent or baseless lien constitutes slander of title, a tortious act for which you, the association, and its board members individually may be held liable for significant financial damages, including punitive damages. Any further communication of a harassing or threatening nature or any attempt to trespass on my property will be documented and forwarded to my legal counsel for appropriate action. I ended the letter with a simple, chilling closing. Govern yourselves accordingly. I printed 10 copies on high-quality bond paper. One for each of the 5 board members, one for their listed legal counsel, one for the HOA management company, one for my file, one for Dave, and one extra just in case. I put each one in a separate envelope. The next morning I went to the post office and sent each letter via certified mail with return receipt requested. It cost me nearly $100, but it was worth every penny. Each of those green return receipts would be a small trophy, a confirmation that my declaration of legal independence had been received. The ball was now in Karen's court. I had responded to her bureaucratic aggression with superior bureaucratic firepower. I had laid a trap of legal principles and documented facts. All she had to do was be her arrogant, dismissive self and walk right into it. I had a feeling she wouldn't disappoint me. The silence from the HOA lasted for exactly 11 days. It was a tense, quiet period where every car that slowed down in front of my house felt like a surveillance mission. I used the time productively, following Dave's advice to fortify my position. I installed a new security camera system, high-definition cameras covering every approach to my house, the driveway, and of course, the smokehouse. The feed was piped directly to a dedicated hard drive, and a cloud backup was created every hour. If Karen so much as sneezed on my property line, I'd have it in 4K resolution from 3 different angles. The return receipts from my certified letters started trickling in, each one signed by a board member. Karen's signature was a spiky, arrogant scrawl. I pinned them to a corkboard in my office like trophies from a successful hunt. On the 12th day, the other shoe dropped. It wasn't another letter to me, it was a community-wide email blast, a copy of which was forwarded to me almost immediately by a neighbor I barely knew, a quiet man named Mark who lived 3 doors down. The subject line was Important Community Security and Compliance Update. The email, written in Karen's signature tone of cheerful fascism, was a masterpiece of passive aggression and veiled threats. On to dismiss frivolous historical claims and so-called legal arguments as attempts to sow discord and avoid responsibility. The message was clear. My meticulously researched legal position was being publicly ridiculed as sovereign citizen nonsense. The email then announced an emergency board meeting to discuss enforcement actions against non-compliant properties, including the filing of liens and potential foreclosure to protect the investments of all other homeowners. But the real escalation was the final paragraph. It announced a new community watch program, encouraging residents to report any and all covenant violations directly to the board via a new anonymous online form. It was a call to create a network of spies, to turn neighbor against neighbor. It was Stasi-level paranoia for the suburbs. My phone rang. Kool-Aid, what she's doing is wrong, he said, his voice hushed. I just wanted you to know, not all of us are drinking the Kool-Aid. What she's doing is wrong. He told me about the meeting. Karen had held up my letter, waved it around, and called it a joke. She told the other board members I was a dangerous troublemaker trying to tear the community apart. She had completely misrepresented the legal weight of the land patent, painting it as a desperate fantasy. According to Mark, the HOA's lawyer, a slick young man named Todd, who seemed more interested in his billable hours than the actual law, had backed her up. He'd advised them that they could and should proceed with the lien, assuring them that the sovereignty argument never holds up in court, completely missing the point that this wasn't about sovereignty, but about a clear chain of title and exclusion from the original plat. Karen, emboldened by her lawyer's terrible advice, had convinced the board to double down. The harassment started the next day. It was petty, designed to be deniable. My trash cans, which I left at the end of my long driveway as I had for 20 years, vanished on trash day. The city confirmed the truck had come. The cans were just gone. A week later, 2 new HOA-approved cans appeared with a bill for $150 taped to one of them. Anonymous calls were made to the county animal control, claiming I had a pack of feral dogs on my property. I have one lazy 13-year-old Labrador. Then came the calls to the fire department and the EPA complaining about noxious smoke and unpermitted commercial burning. These were particularly insidious as they came on days I hadn't even opened the smokehouse door. Someone was trying to create an official record of nuisance complaints against me. The community watch program was in full swing. Every time I went outside to mow the lawn or work in the garden, I'd see them. One of Karen's disciples, standing half hidden behind a curtain, phone held up, recording. A car would slow down as it passed my house, the passenger snapping photos. It was a psychological campaign designed to make me feel watched, isolated, and under siege. I documented it all. I saved the emails. I took screenshots of the neighborhood Facebook group where veiled comments about that house were popping up. I saved the security footage of a car, which I identified as belonging to board member Bob, driving slowly past my house at 2 a.m. I bought new trash cans and kept them up by the garage, hauling them down to the road and back on trash day. With every act of petty tyranny, they were unknowingly building my case for me. They thought they were tightening the noose around my neck. In reality, they were handing me the rope to hang them with. The final piece of their self-destructive puzzle came in the mail a week later. It was a formal notice of intent to file lien from Todd, the HOA's lawyer. It was arrogant, dismissive, and legally sloppy. It was perfect. I scanned it and emailed it to Dave. His response was immediate. They're doing it. The arrogant fools are actually doing it. Jack, this is better than Christmas. The trap was set. The bait was laid. And Karen, blinded by her own power and ego, was leading her entire board, clipboards in hand, straight into the kill zone. The lien threat was the fulcrum upon which the entire conflict would turn. Dave explained it to me in stark, simple terms. Right now, Jack, it's a pissing contest fought with letters. Annoying, but not actionable in a big way. The moment they file that lien, they cross a legal Rubicon. They will have knowingly and maliciously clouded the title to your property with a fraudulent claim. That's called slander of title, and the penalties are severe. It's the legal equivalent of them handing you a loaded gun and pointing it at their own feet. My mission, he said, was to give them one last chance to turn back. Not because we thought they would, but to prove to any future judge or jury that we had acted in good faith while they had acted with malice. We needed to make it impossible for them to claim ignorance. So we drafted the second letter. This one wasn't addressed to the board in general. It was addressed to Karen, Carol, Bob, and the other 2 board members by name at their home addresses. It was also addressed to Todd, the lawyer, at his office. The letter was short, brutal, and surgically precise. It began, "This letter serves as a final legal notice regarding your stated intent to file a lien against the property at 150 Old Farm Road." It went on to explicitly state, "As you have been previously informed and provided with documentary evidence, the Oakwood Preserve HOA lacks any legal jurisdiction over this property. Therefore, any lien filed by the HOA would be, by definition, fraudulent. Then came the hammer. Dave had me include the specific state statute number for slander of title. Under State Statute 47B, Section 113, any party who knowingly files a false or groundless document in the public record that clouds a property's title is liable for actual damages, costs, attorney's fees, and, in cases of malicious intent, punitive damages to be determined by the court. We didn't stop there. We spelled out what malicious intent meant in this context, proceeding with the lien after having been presented with incontrovertible evidence of its invalidity. My first letter was that evidence. This second letter was the nail in their coffin. It ended with a stark warning. Should you proceed, we will not only seek to have the lien immediately expunged, but will also initiate legal action against the Oakwood Preserve HOA as a corporate entity and against each of you, individually, as members of the board of directors, for damages. Your personal assets could be at risk. This is not a threat. It is a statement of legal reality. Govern yourselves accordingly. Sending this letter to their homes was a strategic masterstroke. It pierced the corporate shield they hid behind. This was no longer an abstract problem for the board. It was a personal problem for Karen, the homeowner, for Bob, the retiree. It told them that I knew who they were and where they lived. Parallel to this legal maneuver, I launched a Hearts and Minds campaign. The petty harassment had backfired on Karen in one crucial way. It had made me visible. I had always been the quiet guy on the weird lot at the edge of the neighborhood. Now I was a person. I started taking my old lab, Buster, for slow walks around the neighborhood in the evenings. I made a point to wave and smile at everyone. When someone was working in their yard, I'd wander over and compliment their hydrangeas. I didn't talk about the HOA. I talked about their kids, the weather. I was just a friendly neighbor. It drove Karen's allies crazy, but it disarmed many of the neutral residents. They saw a calm, reasonable man, not the dangerous radical from Karen's emails. The key breakthrough came with Mark, my inside source. He was terrified of Karen, but also a man of principle. He agreed to host a poker night at his house and invited a few other homeowners he knew were unhappy with the board's direction. It wasn't a poker night. It was a war council. In Mark's basement, surrounded by sports memorabilia and the smell of stale beer, I laid out my case. I brought the leather portfolio. I let them hold the original land patent. I showed them the survey map from 1903 and the developer's plat map from 2001, showing the clear exclusion of my property. I laid out the sequence of letters, the threats, and the harassment. The reaction was a mix of shock and anger. One man, a retired accountant named George, had been fined $1,000 because the oil stain on his driveway from his classic car was unsightly. Another woman, Maria, a single mom, had been forced to repaint her front door 3 times to get the approved shade of beige. They all had a story. To go after him, what's to stop her from to go after him? What's to stop her from doing the same to us? That night, an alliance was born. We didn't have a name or a formal structure. We were just a handful of homeowners who had decided that enough was enough. They became my eyes and ears, feeding me information about board movements and community sentiment. They also became a silent army, ready to be mobilized when the time was right. The stage was set. The legal trap was baited and armed. The community was beginning to fracture along lines of tyranny versus freedom. And all I had to do was wait for Karen's pride to do the rest. The notification arrived not by mail, but via an automated email from the county clerk's public records portal, a service I had signed up for weeks prior. It was an alert that a new document had been recorded against my property's parcel ID. I clicked the link, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. And there it was, in black and white, available for the whole world to see. Claim of lien filed by the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association against the property of Jack Miller in the amount of $22,500. The figure represented the initial $10,000 fine plus 25 days of non-compliance penalties. It was official. They had done it. They had walked, eyes wide open, directly into the trap. A slow smile spread across my face. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. For them. I saved a PDF of the recorded lien, A beautiful, self-incriminating document bearing the signature of Karen as president and a notary stamp from the HOA's law office. I immediately forwarded it to Dave with a simple two-word message. They're live. His reply came in under a minute. Game on. I'll start drafting the complaint. This is going to be glorious. For the next week, Dave and I worked like a well-oiled machine. He handled the legal language, the citations, the procedural requirements. I provided the ammunition, the meticulously organized file of evidence I had been compiling for months. Every letter, every email, every return receipt, every photograph, every video file from my security cameras, every logged instance of harassment was scanned, labeled, and uploaded to a shared digital evidence locker. The lawsuit we were filing wasn't a simple request to remove the lien. That was for amateurs. This was a strategic carpet bombing campaign. Dave drafted a multi-count complaint that was a work of art. Count 1, slander of title. This was the main event. We alleged that the HOA and its board had knowingly and with malicious intent filed a fraudulent document on the public record for the express purpose of harming me and extorting money. We weren't just asking for the lien to be removed. We were asking for statutory damages, punitive damages, and all associated legal fees. Count 2, abuse of process. We alleged that they had used the legal process of filing a lien not for its intended purpose, but as a tool of harassment and intimidation, fully aware that their claim was baseless. Count 3, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Here I detailed the campaign of petty harassment, the stolen trash cans, the false reports to county agencies, the constant surveillance by Karen's cronies. We argued this was a deliberate, systematic effort to cause severe emotional distress, backed by my logbook and video evidence. Count 4, breach of the covenant of good faith and fair dealing against the individual board members. This was a more nuanced legal argument Dave was particularly proud of. He argued that even if they believed I was in the HOA, their actions, the exorbitant punitive fine, the refusal to engage in good faith discussion, the immediate escalation, were so far outside the bounds of reasonable governance that they had violated their fiduciary duty to the community they claimed to represent. The masterstroke, however, was in who we named as defendants. We didn't just sue the Oakwood Preserve HOA. We sued the HOA as a corporation, and we sued Karen, Carol, Bob, and the other 2 board members personally. This is called piercing the corporate veil. We argued that their actions were so egregious and so far outside the scope of their duties that they were not entitled to the legal protection of the corporation. They were now personally on the hook. Their houses, their cars, their retirement accounts were all potentially on the line. The day we filed, I drove the complaint to the county courthouse myself. Holding the thick stack of papers stamped by the clerk felt like holding a bomb. It was a declaration of war, but a righteous one. The process server we hired was a former Marine I knew, a big guy named Tiny with a cheerful disposition and an unerring ability to find people who didn't want to be found. The first papers were served on the HOA's lawyer Todd at his glass and chrome office downtown. Tiny told me Todd went pale when he read the caption on the lawsuit and saw his own name listed as a party to the slander of title. We had included him for his role in notarizing and filing the fraudulent document. The best part was serving the board members. Tiny timed it for 6 p.m. when most people were home from work. He served Bob while he was watering his petunias. He served Carol as she was getting out of her minivan, arms full of groceries. The grand finale was Karen. Tiny served her as she was heading out for her evening power walk, clad in a neon pink tracksuit. According to Tiny, she snatched the papers from his hand, took one look at them, and her face turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with her outfit. She screamed at him that he couldn't do this, that she was the president, that she would have his job. Tiny just smiled, wished her a pleasant evening, and walked away, documenting the entire unhinged exchange in his service affidavit. The bomb had been delivered. The fuses were lit. Now we waited for the explosions. The quiet war of letters and threats was over. The very public, very messy, and very expensive part of the fight had just begun. The filing of the lawsuit sent a shockwave through Oakwood Preserve. The initial reaction from Karen and her board was defiant silence. a strategy that lasted until their first meeting with a real, competent lawyer, one hired by the HOA's insurance company. Suddenly, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. The lawsuit kicked off the discovery phase, the part of a legal battle where both sides are forced to show their cards. It's a slow, grinding process designed to unearth the truth, and for Karen's regime, the truth was a landmine. Dave was merciless. He sent out a blizzard of subpoenas and requests for production. We demanded every email, text message, and social media post ever sent by a board member that mentioned me or my property. We demanded all HOA financial records for the past 10 years. We demanded the minutes from every board meeting, including the executive sessions where they thought they could speak freely. We demanded the personal financial records of the board members to search for evidence of commingling funds. Their initial response was to stonewall, to claim documents were lost or privileged. Dave filed a motion to compel, and the judge, an old-school jurist with no patience for games, gave them a week to produce everything or face sanctions. The documents started flowing in, and it was a treasure trove. The emails between board members were damning. We found the thread where my first letter, the one with the land patent, was discussed. Karen had forwarded it to the board with the comment, "Can you believe this clown? Todd says it's garbage. Let's make an example of him." Another board member, the meek Carol, had replied, "Are we sure about this? My cousin is a paralegal and said land patents are serious." Karen's response was swift and brutal. "Carol, are you with us or with him? We need a united front. Do not question my leadership on this." It was a perfect piece of evidence showing they had been warned, had seen the evidence, and had willfully chosen to ignore it in favor of Karen's vendetta. The financial records were even more explosive. We found that Karen had been using the HOA's debit card for personal expenses, manicures, expensive dinners, even a weekend trip to a conference at a casino resort. The fines she collected weren't going to community improvements. They were going into a discretionary slush fund that she controlled with no oversight. The unsightly oil stain fine from George the accountant, that money had paid for a new set of designer luggage for Karen. The money Maria, the single mom, had paid for her unapproved door color, it had gone to a consulting fee for Karen's brother-in-law's landscaping company, which had then done some complimentary work at Karen's house. My smokehouse was never the issue. It was just the latest excuse to generate revenue for her personal piggy bank. The depositions were the main event. A deposition is sworn testimony, taken outside of court but under oath. It's where lawyers get to question the opposing party, and Dave was a master of the craft. He started with the weaker links. Carol, the pinched-faced board member, was on the verge of tears within 20 minutes. Under Dave's calm, relentless questioning, she admitted she had doubts from the beginning, but was too afraid of Karen to speak up. She admitted the board never actually voted on the lien. Karen had just declared it was happening. Bob, the silent, beefy one, was next. He tried to be tough, but his story crumbled when Dave presented him with the security footage of his car doing a 2 a.m. drive-by of my house. He claimed he was just patrolling, but his credibility was shot. Finally, it was Karen's turn. She walked into the conference room like she was entering a throne room, flanked by the now panicked HOA lawyer, Todd, and a new grim-faced lawyer from the insurance company. She was arrogant, combative, and evasive. It was a disastrous performance. Dave would ask a simple question. "Miss Karen's last name, prior to authorizing the lien, did you or anyone on your behalf take steps to verify the HOA's jurisdiction by examining the plat maps at the county recorder's office?" Karen's answer was a rambling tirade about her duty to uphold property values and how I was a scofflaw. Dave would wait patiently and then ask again, "That's a very interesting speech, ma'am, but it doesn't answer my question. It's a yes or no question. Did you check the plat map?" "I don't have to explain my process to you," she snapped. "Bad answer," Dave murmured, making a note on his legal pad. "Can you explain this charge for $300 at the end of the month?" "I'm sorry, but I can't provide that information. The HOA's bank statements are confidential, and I'm not authorized to share them with you." "Understood. Thank you for your assistance." "Can you explain this charge for $300 at the Gilded Lily Spa?" he asked. "That was a business expense," she said without blinking. "I was under a great deal of stress from dealing with non-compliant residents. A massage was necessary for me to continue serving the community. The court reporter, a woman who had been typing with robotic efficiency, actually snorted out loud. The insurance lawyer put his head in his hands. The discovery process wasn't just building our case. It was revealing a pattern of systemic corruption and abuse that went far beyond my smokehouse. Karen's obsession with controlling my property was just one symptom of a much deeper disease. And now, thanks to her, that disease was being dissected under the bright, unforgiving lights of the legal system. The information we were unearthing in discovery was pure gold, but it was only valuable if we could use it to apply pressure outside the courtroom. A lawsuit can drag on for years. Public opinion is much faster. My neighborhood alliance, the Poker Night crew, had been quietly growing. We now had a dozen families who were fed up and ready to act. It was time to go public. We created a simple but effective website, Oakwood Preserve Reform.com. The homepage had a single powerful headline: Is your HOA board working for you or for themselves? Below it, we began to post the public documents from the lawsuit. We didn't post gossip or accusations, we posted facts. We uploaded the board members' depositions with the most damning admissions highlighted. We posted the HOA financial statements with Karen's personal expenses circled in red. We posted the email exchanges showing their malicious intent. And of course, we told my story. We uploaded a scan of the 1903 land patent, a photo of my smokehouse, and a timeline of the harassment I had endured. We presented the case clearly and calmly, letting the board's own words and actions convict them. We created a corresponding Facebook page, and Mark's tech-savvy teenage son showed us how to use a small ad budget to target the page specifically to residents of our zip code. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. People who had been living in quiet fear, thinking they were the only ones being targeted, suddenly realized they were part of a pattern. The comments section erupted with stories. They fined me $50 because my kid's bicycle was left in the driveway for 2 hours. I got a violation notice because my Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd. Karen made my 80-year-old mother dig up her prize-winning roses because they weren't on the approved plant list. It was a digital dam breaking. The trickle of discontent became a flood of communal anger. The real turning point, however, came when a producer for the local TV news station's investigative segment got a tip. Her name was Jessica, a hungry young reporter looking for a story with teeth. She found our website, and she smelled blood. She called me. I was hesitant at first, but Dave convinced me it was the right move. The optics are perfect, he said. Hero veteran, defending his ancestral land against a corrupt, power-mad HOA president. You can't write a better script. We agreed to an interview, but on my terms. It would happen on my property, in front of the smokehouse. I would be calm, factual, and dignified. I wore a simple polo shirt, not my old uniform. I didn't want to look like I was hiding behind my service. I wanted to look like an ordinary citizen who had been pushed too far. Jessica, the reporter, was sharp. She asked tough questions, but they were fair. I walked her through the history of the land, showed her the patent, and laid out the timeline of the conflict. I never raised my voice. I stuck to the facts. My final statement was simple. This was never about a smokehouse, I said, looking directly into the camera. It's about property rights. It's about a group of people who get a little bit of power and let it go to their heads. All I've ever wanted was to be left alone on the land my family has owned and for over a century. They wouldn't let that happen. So now we have to let the justice system work. The news crew then did what good reporters do. They went to get the other side of the story. They found Karen as she was leaving a board meeting, one that had presumably been about how to handle the PR nightmare I had just created. They ambushed her in the parking lot. Karen Jessica from Channel 4 News, can you comment on the lawsuit filed by Mr. Miller? Can you respond to allegations that you used HOA funds for personal spa days? Karen, who could have simply said no comment and walked away, instead took the bait. We have rules. He thinks he's special, but he's not. He's a threat to this community. We have rules. He thinks he's special, but he is not. This is a private matter, and you have no right to harass me. She lunged at the cameraman, trying to swat the camera away. The clip was television gold. The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. It opened with a shot of me, calm and stoic, holding the 1903 patent. It then cut to the footage of Karen's wild-eyed on their website, and it went viral on their website, and it went viral locally. The HOA's insurance company, which had been concerned before, was now in full-blown panic. Their client wasn't just losing a lawsuit. She was committing reputational suicide on live television, and she was taking the rest of the board and the insurance company's money with her. The public exposure had turned up the heat from a simmer to a rolling boil. The pressure was now unbearable, and something had to give. The morning after the news report aired, the first crack in the board's united front appeared. I received a call from a lawyer I didn't know. He introduced himself as the personal attorney for Carol, the perpetually nervous board member. My client is prepared to offer her full and truthful testimony in exchange for being dropped as a named defendant in the lawsuit, he said, his voice clipped and professional. She was flipping. She was offering to turn state's evidence, in a manner of speaking, to save her own skin. I told him we'd consider it. An hour later, a similar call came from the new lawyer for Bob, the late-night patroller. The rats were deserting the sinking ship. They saw Karen for what she was, a liability who was going to drag them all down with her. They were no longer afraid of her. They were afraid of me, of Dave, and of the consequences of their own foolishness. The real call, the one we had been waiting for, came that afternoon. It was from the grim-faced insurance lawyer. His tone had changed dramatically from the arrogance of the deposition room. He was now conciliatory, almost pleading. "Mr. Miller, I think we can all agree this situation has gotten out of hand," he began. "My client, the insurance carrier for the HOA, has authorized me to open settlement negotiations. We are prepared to make a reasonable offer to resolve this matter swiftly." Dave, who I had patched into the call, gave a silent signal. Let him talk. The lawyer's first offer was insulting. They would arrange to have the lien removed, and the HOA would agree to drop all fines and forgive the alleged violation. In return, we would drop our lawsuit. I almost laughed. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "That's not a settlement offer. That's the unconditional surrender you should have offered 2 months ago. The price has gone up." The lawyer sighed. "What is it you're looking for, Mr. Miller?" Dave finally spoke up. "Here's what it's going to take to make this go away," he said, his voice cold and hard. "This is not a negotiation. This is the bill." And he laid it out. 1, a substantial 6-figure monetary payment to Mr. Miller. This sum is to cover damages for slander of title, harassment, and emotional distress. It is non-negotiable. 2, the HOA will pay in full every penny of Mr. Miller's legal fees. Also non-negotiable. 3, the immediate and unconditional removal of the fraudulent lien with all costs borne by the HOA. 4, a formal public apology to Mr. Miller and his family, to be drafted by us and approved by you, which will be posted on the HOA website for no less than 1 year and mailed to every single homeowner in Oakwood Preserve. 5, the immediate and permanent resignation of Karen, Carol, and the entire current board of directors. They will be barred from ever serving on the board again. 6, the appointment of an independent, court-ordered forensic auditor to conduct a full review of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. The results of this audit will be made public. 7, a legally binding permanent injunction filed with the county court, formally acknowledging that Mr. Miller's property is not and never will be subject to the HOA's jurisdiction, preventing any future board from ever trying this again. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The lawyer finally stammered, That's outrageous. The resignations, the audit, you can't demand that." "Watch us," Dave said. "This isn't just about money. This is about justice and reform. This is about making sure this never happens to anyone else in that community again. You have 48 hours to accept these terms. If we do not have a signed settlement agreement in our hands by then, we are filing a motion for summary judgment based on the deposition evidence, and we will let a jury decide on punitive damages. I can assure you they will be far less forgiving than we are being today." He hung up the phone. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity on their end. We heard through the grapevine, that is Mark, that there was an emergency board meeting that devolved into a screaming match. Karen was apparently apoplectic, accusing the others of betrayal. The others, facing personal financial ruin, were screaming right back. The insurance company, seeing the mountain of evidence against them and the potential for a jury to award millions in punitive damages, played the final card. They informed the board that if they did not accept the settlement, the insurer would issue a reservation of rights letter, which essentially meant they believed the board's actions were so malicious and intentional that they might not be covered by the policy. That would leave the board members truly, personally, and catastrophically liable. Faced with total annihilation, they folded. On the second day, just hours before our deadline, the signed settlement agreement arrived by courier. Every term was met, every demand was satisfied. Karen's reign of terror was officially over. She had been so obsessed with tearing down my smokehouse that she had ended up tearing down her own corrupt kingdom instead. The paperwork, the weapon she had wielded against so many for so long, had been turned against her with devastating effect. The victory was total. The aftermath was both swift and deeply satisfying. The settlement agreement acted like a cleansing fire sweeping through the rotten structure of the Oakwood Preserve HOA. The first and most visible change was the mass resignation. An email went out to the entire community, a terse, one-sentence announcement that Karen and the entire board were stepping down, effective immediately. There was no explanation, no flowery thank you for their service. They were simply gone. The second part of the settlement, the public apology, was a work of art crafted by Dave. It was not a weak, we regret if anyone was offended statement. It was a direct, unequivocal admission of wrongdoing. It detailed how the board had overstepped its authority, wrongfully targeted me, filed a fraudulent lien, and misused their power. It named me specifically and apologized for the harassment my family and I had endured. As per the agreement, it was posted in a large, bold font on the homepage of the HOA website, replacing the usual cheerful picture of a perfectly manicured lawn. The forensic audit, ordered by the court, began a week later. The auditors descended on the HOA's management office and began to piece together the years of financial mismanagement. The preliminary findings were so alarming that the county district attorney's office took notice. Karen's use of HOA funds for personal enrichment wasn't just a breach of fiduciary duty, it was potentially criminal embezzlement. The quiet satisfaction of seeing the system work was one thing, but the true victory was in the community itself. The reform group, my small band of allies, was tasked by the court with forming an interim board. George, the retired accountant with the classic car, was named interim president. Maria, the single mom who had been hassled about her door color, became the new head of the Architectural Review Committee. Their first act was to declare a 6-month moratorium on all violation notices, except for health and safety issues. They wanted to review every single rule in the covenant, tossing out the absurd and clarifying the ambiguous. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed almost overnight. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of liberation. People started planting unapproved flowers. Kids left their bikes in driveways. The oppressive beige conformity began to give way to a little bit of color in life. A few months passed, the seasons turned, the final report from the forensic auditor was released, and it was a bombshell. It detailed over $50,000 in misappropriated funds, all traced directly back to Karen. The DA filed formal charges for felony embezzlement. Karen's big house at the end of the cul-de-sac went up for sale, a forced sale by owner sign planted hastily in the front yard. The symbolic final confrontation when it came was not loud or dramatic. On the old oak in my yard, we're just beginning to turn. I had finally fired up the smokehouse. I had 2 massive briskets, a dozen racks of ribs, and pounds of sausage smoking slow and low over hickory wood. The smell, a rich, fragrant perfume of smoke and spices, drifted through the neighborhood. A smell of peace, of freedom, of victory. Our backyard was filled with people. Dave and his family were there. Mark, George, Maria, and the rest of the Reform Alliance were there with their families. My lawn was covered in kids and dogs, all running free. The sound was a symphony of laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses. Around 2 in the afternoon, as I was pulling the first brisket off the smoker, its bark a perfect dark crust. I saw it. A big, yellow moving van was parked in front of Karen's old house. A crew was loading the last of her furniture. And there she was. She looked smaller, diminished, dressed in drab colors. Her face was puffy, stripped of its usual mask of authority. She was directing the movers, her voice lacking its old iron command. She turned, and for a moment her eyes scanned the neighborhood she once ruled. They passed over the houses, the lawns, and then they settled on my property. She saw the crowd of people, the laughter, the life, and she saw the smoke rising in a gentle, steady plume from the very structure that had been the catalyst for her downfall. Our eyes met across the distance. 100 yards of lawn, a street, and a world of difference separated us. There was no anger in her gaze anymore, just a hollow, empty defeat. I looked at her, the brisket steaming on the cutting board in front of me, surrounded by the friends and community she had tried to tear apart. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph or gloating. It was a nod of finality, an acknowledgement, a dismissal. She turned away, got into the passenger seat of a beat-up sedan, and was driven away, disappearing from Oakwood Preserve forever. I turned back to my guests, to the feast I had prepared. I picked up my grandfather's old carving knife and made the first cut into the brisket. It was perfect, tender, juicy, and infused with the taste of hard-won, patiently smoked victory. Justice, I thought to myself, is a dish best served smoked.